Hi everybody, we are back today with another video lesson. This one is about dealing with difficult people, which is such an important skill not only in our leadership roles but in our lives in general. There are difficult people everywhere and so we're going to talk a little bit today about what kind of people and some methods of coping and dealing with difficult people. Now, obviously, this is a concept that is much bigger than a single video lesson or even, a short series of video lessons could address. There have been numerous books written on the topic. If you do a little bit of research, I'm going to be posting some resources. You can find some different information and more expanded information, but this is going to give you some groundwork to deal with when you are dealing with difficult people. All right. So first, let's talk about the types of difficult people. Some are combinations of a few of these, but some really have a singular trait that makes them challenging to deal with. The first one is somebody who is angry or just constantly negative, that no matter what idea is put up, they shoot it down. That no matter how good a job somebody is, there's something wrong. So obviously being angry and being negative are different, but they stem from the same feeling of frustration, I think, on the difficult person's part. Now, anger is something that comes to be a bit more volatile and can cause a really high level of emotion, both for the person that is angry and the person that they're directing their anger at. And so those are some nuances that are helpful to understand when dealing with this kind of person. Another kind of person is somebody who gets on a power trip. Now, this happens all across humanity, certainly, but in the kink communities particularly, or in any movie, in the kink communities, not movies, in the kink communities, it's even easier for people to get on power trips when, their name, quote unquote, might be, Master So-and-so or Mistress of the Universe or Princess, owner of all she sees. And sometimes people forget in the kink community how to put that side of themselves away in order to deal more directly in a more egalitarian way with the people they're working with. You or anyone is not automatically in a subservient position just because someone thinks that they have more power over you, unless that's something that's been pre-negotiated. So the power tripper, and this even goes down to, when I go to events, I'm pretty well known at the events that I go to, and while I certainly don't, throw that around too much, there have been times when door monitors get very dedicated to their work. It's an example of someone who's given a little bit of power or control or whatever and runs with it. And so, it can be anyone from a door monitor all the way up to a board president, and there are different ways of dealing with those different levels. People who are passive aggressive. This one is, from my perspective, particularly annoying because I like to address things head on, and for people who talk around issues or who just make snide comments, but always in the guise of, oh, I'm just joking. That's like the most ridiculous phrase ever. Insult, insult, insult. Just joking. So passive aggressiveness needs to be dealt with, in my opinion, head on to draw out the actual problem. So we'll talk more about that. People that are just disengaged or checked out, people that are just apathetic and are, I think of this when either somebody is just really burnt out or is having perhaps some difficult problems in their personal lives, that sort of thing, but who really is just, it's kind of like talking to a wall. Then, of course, there's the know-it-all. There's the person who truly believes that they know best in every situation regarding every problem. So the know-it-all can be a really tough personality to come up against, but it is possible. And part of that is being closed to new ideas. You can be very confident in your skills. You can be a know-it-all without negative connotation in your specialty, in terms of that it's like if you, let's say, organize people's closets for a living, and then somebody needs to organize a bunch of product for a big event, then yeah, your experience, your perspective needs to be held above those who are just kind of trying to make it work. So that's different to someone who will just not hear a new idea, and again, who just shoots it down, and I know a lot of younger leaders, a lot of up-and-coming leaders find that particularly with long-time leaders or older leaders. So it's a problem. So, and really, anyone with a perspective that's different from yours could be considered difficult. That the mere fact that you have to adjust your way of communicating, is more difficult than if you don't. And then there's also the kind of person who is typically not a difficult person, who typically is pleasant to deal with, gets things done on time, listens, etc., but maybe something is happening in their personal life that is causing a temporary personality change. I'll use myself as an example. 2012, the year, was a really difficult one for me. I had professional challenges, I had some personal challenges, and it really, really severely affected my mood and the way that I was able to interact with people. I had a lot of bitterness that just would kind of spew out of me even when I didn't mean for it to. There would be times when I would consciously say, all right, we're not going to talk about that subject. If that subject comes up, I'm going to just move on. And sadly, until I was emotionally ready to move on, I always took the bait. So it was not my best year of, interactions. But that's not how I usually am, and have certainly moved on, thankfully, both for myself and those around me, this year, 2013, and I'm sure continuing on. But, there is situational difficulty that needs to be considered. Okay, moving on. Now, my personal approach to dealing with difficult situations made up of difficult people is what I call a little bit of vinegar, a little bit of honey. Now, we hopefully probably have all heard the phrase, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. But I don't entirely think that's true, because sometimes, we don't, being all sweet and sweet as pie is not going to be helpful. It's not going to be effective. And so there is a time to be firm and demanding in a respectful way, but there is also time to be empathetic and to sometimes lighten the mood a little bit. Another personal example is that I moved cross-country from Boston to the Bay Area and dealt with a one of those container shipping movers, and originally had a great customer service experience. And then after that, everything went downhill. And when I eventually got a manager, now obviously this isn't a leadership example, but it's an example nonetheless. When I got a manager on the phone, my frustration levels were pretty high, but I know it doesn't ever help to yell at people. And so to learn how to express your firmness without yelling is something that's good to practice just on an everyday level. So when this manager would say to me, I'm sorry, there's nothing that I can do, I'd say, really, there's absolutely nothing within your power to make me, a customer who's paid a lot of money, make this work and make me happy. There's nothing in your power that you can do. And then, he'd say, well, maybe I could do this. And then it's, well, I appreciate that you're working with me, and I know that, that this isn't all in your hands. And so, I appreciate that we're working together to fix this problem. So it's kind of, you're playing the good cop, bad cop all within yourself. So that's my personal approach to dealing a lot of times with difficult situations, and sometimes difficult people. Now, I asked around from some of the truly smart people that I know about some different techniques with dealing with difficult people. The first is to be compassionate. Again, I think that this is a good tip, just generally speaking. Be compassionate. You have no idea what's going on in someone's life unless they're telling you, and even still, they're probably not telling you the full story. So just be compassionate and realize that whatever it is that's causing someone to behave in a difficult manner is probably just as unpleasant for them as it is for you, whether that's on the surface or buried deep down. One suggestion was to explain things slowly. Now, I think this, needs to be taken with a small grain of salt, in the sense that you don't want to speak down to someone, because particularly you don't want to speak down to a difficult person. That's not going to be helpful. But really slowing down the conversation, going kind of point by point together, is a way to make sure that communication happens. One suggestion was reverse psychology. So, that can have good solutions and bad solutions, but it certainly is a method. One way is to kill them with kindness, that no matter how unpleasant they get, that you smile and you nod and you pretend like they're being a pleasant person. Now, your ability to do that has a lot to do with your own personality. I, at times, have a very difficult time doing that. But, every once in a while it's appropriate. One thing is to just be honest and to be forthright. Now, the response to that is entirely up to them. And actually, let me make that point right now, is that no matter how you approach someone who is being difficult, their response is theirs. It is not yours. Maybe you need to try a couple of these options, but if someone is just not responding, don't blame yourself. Let them take responsibility for their own behavior. And so be honest, saying, hey, we seem to be having this problem, or we're definitely having this problem. Let's sit down and have an honest conversation about it. And both being honest yourself and then making room for their perspective. And so that's a really helpful thing too. Again, another old saying. These old sayings are old saying for a reason. Put yourselves in their shoes. And so try to understand where they're coming from, why they're behaving the way they're behaving, and try to come at it from that, with that knowledge. You can also just, if it's possible, just don't engage very much. Just avoid confrontations. Keep communications minimal and polite and to the point. Sometimes that's possible if it's not someone you have to deal with on a super regular basis, but just don't. If you think this is particularly helpful, if you don't think that the other person really has much of a chance to hear you. Some people just cannot hear others. And so if that's the case, if there's not progress to be made, then just avoid the situation if you can. That's not a bad thing. That is a healthy choice for yourself and probably for everybody involved. One thing that's sometimes helpful for dealing with difficult people is to give them busy work. Just give them a job. Give them a job that makes them feel important. Give them a job that maybe is not quite as important as they might feel it is. Just give them something to do. One of the most important things is to be conscious of your own responses and control yourself, not them. Again, that is like what I just said a moment ago in terms of all you really have control over, even in this master, mistress, God, ma'am, sir universe, is that you can't actually control how someone responds. Maybe you can control how they express it in certain, DS, master-slave situations, but as a leader, just dealing with people, you cannot control their response, no matter what path you take. And so just try to focus instead on how you're responding, not reacting. Try not to react. Look up the difference. And take pride in the fact that you are in charge of yourself. Another option that is usually a great one, if you can find a great mediator, is to use a mediator, someone who is truly neutral, that neither one of you will feel like is on one side or the other, and somebody who is really good at communication. A mediator is only helpful when they have the skill or the talent or the art of listening to someone and then being able to translate it into language that another person can understand. This is not just like Spanish to English kind of a thing. It's I have a certain way of talking, you have a certain way of talking, and they're not meshing. And so we need someone who can understand how both of us talk to try to help each of us understand the other. So don't just grab the nearest person and say, I'm having trouble with this other person, I need you to sit in on this. Because that's, frankly, really ineffective and a waste of your time. Okay, so you can give, along with the same idea of being honest earlier, you can give constructive critique with examples. This is true, frankly, in any relationship. It is not helpful to make blanket statements. You always do such and such. I never feel such and such. Blanket statements do not help. Exact examples do help. And so you might say, and anybody who's been to therapy or read any kind of therapy, relationship, self-help books knows this trick, where you don't say you statements, you say I statements. So you might say, I felt like the other day when I asked you to take care of this volunteer at an event and you instead passed it off to someone else, that's an example of how you undermine my authority as the leader of this event, right? So you see how I used an I statement. I did use a you statement, but it's also about my perceptions and using a concrete example of a behavior that you're trying to discourage. Be upfront without attacking. Again, don't go into it with anger yourself. Don't go into it with, well, you do this and you do that, and everybody hates it when you do this. Anybody who feels attacked is not going to be able to hear you. And so you have two options. Do you want to just yell at somebody and get it off your chest, which tends to be quite the backsliding choice, or do you want to put the other person in a position where they can hear you? great, then don't attack them. Another way to make sure that you're understanding, let's say you don't have a mediator and so you want to try to mediate the situation, a great way to do that is reflecting back to them. So they might say, you know, blah, 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 blah. And then you say, okay, what I'm hearing from you is that you are feeling blah, 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 blah. Okay? So, like, literally using that exact phrase. What I'm hearing you say, or when you say that, I hear, you know, you feel free to mix the words around, but some version of that is really important. And again, it comes back to, a lot of times people just want to be heard. So just listen to their side of the story, listen to what their thoughts are, be respectful that people see things in a different way than you. And then maybe that's a good starting point before you use one of these other techniques. Another option that I use frequently is to choose how I'm communicating with somebody. Talking face-to-face can be volatile, but you get a moment-by-moment view of how the other person is reacting. One that I didn't put here on the screen is that, of course, having a phone conversation where you're still having that more direct person-to-person contact through your voices, but you don't have to be face-to-face, you don't have to be in the same room, and you can still gauge. It's not as easy to gauge what someone's response is because you don't have body language to also be looking at, but the phone can be a great way of communicating if being face-to-face is not working, or if your emails are not working. Sometimes it's good to just take some time to write an email, to write down your thoughts, because sometimes in the midst of dealing with someone or arguing with someone, we lose track of what we actually want to say. And so writing an email, or even frankly taking notes before you have a phone call or are face-to-face, can help you stay on track and make sure that you say what you want to say, and then, you know, see what their response is. Okay, so that is the ground level version of difficult people and some ways of coping with, dealing with, interacting with difficult people. I would love to hear what type of difficult people you've dealt with, what the situations were, and how you dealt with it, how you, maybe a time that you felt like you dealt with it really well, maybe a time that you wished you could have done something different, or in hindsight knew that you could have maybe handled things differently. So I want to hear about your experiences. Now, obviously, we have all dealt with multiple people who are difficult over the course of our lives. So don't feel like you have to go through and list every single one. Just pick, you know, your top one. Either the top one that you handled best, the top one you handled worst, or perhaps both. And why it was difficult, and why you chose the method of communication or coping that you did. Okay? So this is Dealing with Difficult People, and I will see you in the next video.